In the quiet hours before sleep, when the day's noise fades and the mind begins its gentle descent into rest, there exists a space where ancient wisdom can speak directly to the heart. Tonight, we journey together into one of humanity's most treasured spiritual texts, a collection of ascesis that has guided seekers for more than 2,500 years. This is the Dhammapada, the path of truth, and within its pages lies a map for navigating not just the challenges of existence, but the very nature of mind itself. Close your eyes if you wish, or let them rest softly on these words. There is no rush here, no urgency. The teachings we explore tonight have waited 25 centuries to reach you, and they will wait patiently for each insight to settle, each understanding to take root. The Dhammapada is not a text that demands anything of you. Rather, it offers itself, verse by verse, like a trusted friend sharing hard-won wisdom over countless conversations. The name itself carries meaning worth dwelling upon. Dhamma, in the ancient Pali language, refers to the ultimate truth, the fundamental nature of reality, the teachings that illuminate the path. Pada can mean a step, a word, a portion of the path. Together, Dhammapada becomes the path of truth, the verses of the doctrine, the footsteps toward understanding. Some scholars translate it as the way of Dharma, others as portions of truth. Each translation captures something essential. This is not merely a book of rules or commandments. It is a collection of crystallized insights, each verse a doorway into deeper understanding, each chapter an invitation to examine life with new eyes. Within the vast ocean of Buddhist scripture, the Dhammapada holds a unique place. The complete Pali Canon, the earliest written record of the Buddha's teachings, fills 40-odd volumes with sutras, rules for monastic conduct, and detailed philosophical analysis. Yet, if all those volumes were lost and only the Dhammapada remained, we would still possess the essential core of Buddhist wisdom. Its 423 verses, arranged across 26 chapters, distill the Buddha's teachings into a form accessible to anyone, whether monk or layperson, scholar or simple seeker. The text's enduring power lies in its directness. These are not abstract philosophical speculations, but practical guidance for living. Each verse emerged from a specific moment, a real situation where the Buddha observed suffering and offered a path beyond it. A greedy merchant receives a teaching on generosity. A quarreling couple hears about the futility of hatred. A confused student learns about the nature of mind. The Buddha's responses to these countless situations were remembered, recited, and eventually compiled into the anthology we know today. Imagine those early Buddhist communities in ancient India, gathering in the evening's coolness. Before writing became common, before scrolls and manuscripts, the Buddha's words lived in human memory. Monks would chant the verses together, the rhythm and meter helping them remember each teaching precisely. Young students would sit at their teacher's feet, absorbing not just the words, but the living tradition behind them. The verses passed from mouth to ear, from teacher to student, across generations. What you will hear tonight has traveled through an unbroken chain of transmission, stretching back to those first moments when the Buddha spoke these truths aloud. The historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, lived approximately 25 centuries ago in what is now Nepal and northern India. His words were preserved through this oral tradition for several centuries before being committed to writing. According to scholarly estimates, the verses were first written down sometime in the 1st century before the Common Era. The oldest surviving physical manuscripts date to around 1500 years ago, but the tradition of the text itself is far older. By the time Buddhist monks inscribed these verses onto palm leaves, they had already been recited, contemplated, and transmitted for hundreds of years. In the 5th century, a brilliant scholar monk named Buddhaghosa compiled an extensive commentary on the Dhammapada. His work, known as the Dhammapada Atthakatha, provides the traditional context for each verse. According to Buddhaghosa, each of the 423 verses arose in response to a unique situation in the Buddha's life and ministry. These stories, which numbered 305 separate occasions, transform the verses from abstract maxims into vivid, human moments. The commentary reveals the Buddha not as a distant sage, but as a teacher responding with precision and compassion to the specific struggles of real people. The text journey from ancient India to the modern world is itself a remarkable story. While Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, and other Southeast Asian nations preserved and cherished the Dhammapada for centuries, it remained virtually unknown in the West until the mid-19th century. In 1855, a Danish scholar named Viggo Fausbøll produced the first critical edition in Latin, making it the very first Pali text to receive scholarly European examination. This was followed by numerous translations into English and other Western languages. Max Muller, F.L. Woodward, Irving Babbitt, and many others brought their linguistic skills and philosophical insights to the task of rendering these ancient verses into modern idiom. Yet translation is never simple. The Pali language contains layers of meaning, nuances that resist easy conversion to English. A single word might carry philosophical, psychological, and practical dimensions simultaneously. Different translators emphasize different aspects, and so we find that the Dhammapada exists today in dozens of English versions, each offering a slightly different window into the original. This is not a weakness, but a strength. Just as different angles of light reveal different facets of a diamond, different translations reveal different depths within these timeless verses. What makes the Dhammapada universally accessible is its refusal to demand blind faith or religious conversion. The Buddha himself encouraged his followers to test his teachings against their own experience. Do these practices lead to peace or agitation? Does this path reduce suffering or increase it? The verses speak to fundamental human experiences, the challenge of controlling one's mind, the pain of loss, the sweetness of friendship, the difficulty of ethical living in a complex world. You need not be Buddhist to find wisdom here. You need only be human and willing to look honestly at your own life. The 26 chapters that comprise the Dhammapada range across the landscape of human spiritual development. The opening chapter presents contrasting pairs: the mind shaped by purity versus the mind corrupted by unwholesome thoughts, hatred versus loving kindness, heedfulness versus negligence. Subsequent chapters explore specific themes: vigilance, the nature of mind, flowers and their symbolism, the qualities of the fool, the characteristics of the wise, the arahant or perfected sage, anger, impurity, punishment, old age, the self, the world, the Buddha, happiness, affection, craving, the bhikkhu or monk, and finally the brahmana, the holy person who has transcended conventional categories. Each chapter contains anywhere from a handful to 40 verses, all exploring variations on its central theme. The structure is not rigidly systematic, not a step-by-step progression like a textbook. Instead, it mirrors the organic way wisdom actually unfolds in a spiritual life. One day, you need to hear about patience. Another day, about letting go. Still, another day, about the power of concentrated effort. The Dhammapada offers all of these, trusting that the teachings you need will find you when you are ready. As we prepare to explore this text more deeply, it helps to understand something of the man whose insights these verses preserve. The Buddha was not a god, not a prophet claiming revelation from on high. He was a human being who, through extraordinary effort and insight, discovered a path out of suffering. His journey from confused prince to enlightened teacher forms the essential context for everything recorded in the Dhammapada. To understand these verses, we must first understand the man who spoke them, and the transformative night that changed not just his life, but the course of spiritual history. The Buddha's path to awakening. The story begins in the 6th century before the Common Era, in the foothills of the Himalayas. The man we know as the Buddha was born Siddhartha Gautama, son of Suddhodana, ruler of the Shakya clan. His birthplace, Lumbini, lies in present-day Nepal. According to tradition, his mother Maya died 7 days after his birth, and he was raised by her sister in the palace of Kapilavastu. The infant prince's birth was attended by prophecy. A sage named Asita examined the child and declared that young Siddhartha would become either a great king, a Chakravartin who rules the world through righteousness, or a great spiritual teacher who illuminates the way to liberation. His father, hoping to secure a royal heir and political successor, determined to shield the boy from anything that might turn his thoughts towards spiritual seeking. And so, Siddhartha grew up in extraordinary luxury, confined within palace walls where every desire was met, every comfort provided, every hardship kept carefully out of sight. 3 palaces were built for him, 1 for each season, and he was surrounded by every pleasure the ancient world could offer. He received the finest education available to a prince. He married a beautiful woman named Yasodhara, and they had a son, Rahula. By all conventional measures, Siddhartha Gautama had everything: wealth, power, beauty, family, prestige. Yet even in the midst of such abundance, something stirred in him, some sense of incompleteness, some question that luxury could not answer. The turning point came when Siddhartha, at age 29, ventured beyond the palace walls on a series of excursions. What he saw on these journeys shattered his sheltered worldview. On his first trip, he encountered an old man, bent and frail, supported by a staff. Siddhartha asked his charioteer what he was seeing. The charioteer explained that this was the fate that awaits all who live long enough. Youth fades, the body weakens, old age spares no one, not even princes. On a second journey, Siddhartha saw someone racked by disease, body wasted by illness, unable to move without assistance. Again he asked, and again received the difficult truth. Disease strikes without warning. Sickness does not respect wealth or position. The flesh that seems so solid, so dependable, can betray us at any moment. The third sight was the most disturbing of all. Siddhartha witnessed a funeral procession, saw a corpse being carried to the cremation ground. Death itself was revealed to him, not as abstract concept, but as concrete reality. The body that once held a living person, with hopes and fears and memories, reduced to cold flesh, soon to be ash and smoke. And the charioteer confirmed what Siddhartha feared. Death comes to all. There is no escape, no exception, no amount of wealth or power that can prevent this final dissolution. These three sights, traditionally called the four sights, when combined with what came next, awakened in Siddhartha what Buddhists call samvega, a complex emotion combining shock, dismay, spiritual urgency, and determination. He had been living in a dream, and now the dream was breaking apart. Old age, sickness, and death waited for him, for his wife, for his infant son, for everyone he loved. What was the point of all this luxury if it merely postponed the inevitable? What good were palaces if they could not keep out these universal afflictions? Then came the fourth sight, the one that offered a possibility beyond despair. Siddhartha saw a wandering ascetic, a samana, who had renounced worldly life to seek spiritual truth. This holy man's face held something Siddhartha had not seen in the palace, despite all its pleasures. Peace, serenity, a sense of purpose beyond the fleeting satisfactions of sensory pleasure. Here was someone who had looked directly at the facts of suffering and was actively seeking an answer, a way through. That night, Siddhartha made his decision. He would leave everything behind: palace, throne, wife, newborn son, all the comfort and security of his life. He would become a seeker, joining the wandering ascetics who roamed the forests and villages of ancient India in search of liberation. This departure, known in Buddhism as the Great Renunciation, was not an act of escapism or irresponsibility. It was an act of profound moral courage, a willingness to face the hardest questions existence poses, even at tremendous personal cost. For the next 6 years, Siddhartha threw himself into the spiritual practices of his time, with the same determination he had once brought to palace life. He studied under renowned meditation masters, quickly mastering their techniques. He achieved states of concentration so deep that ordinary reality seemed to dissolve. Yet even these exalted mental states did not provide the ultimate answer he sought. When the meditation ended, when he emerged from absorption, the fundamental questions remained unanswered. These practices could temporarily suppress suffering, but they did not uproot its cause. Unsatisfied with meditative attainment alone, Siddhartha turned to extreme asceticism. He joined a group of 5 fellow seekers who believed that liberation required mortification of the flesh. They practiced severe austerities, reducing their food intake to almost nothing, exposing themselves to the elements, depriving the body of comfort, in the belief that such deprivation would free the spirit. Siddhartha pushed this practice further than anyone. According to traditional accounts, he ate so little that his body became skeletal, his ribs visible beneath the skin, his limbs like brittle sticks. He sat in meditation until the sun scorched him and the rain soaked him. He endured pain that would have broken most people. Yet after 6 years of this punishing discipline, Siddhartha made a startling discovery. He was no closer to liberation than when he started. The austerities had weakened his body without strengthening his wisdom. The self-torture had produced suffering without insight. He remembered a moment from his childhood, sitting beneath a rose apple tree while his father worked, experiencing a state of spontaneous meditative absorption that combined calm with awareness, peace with clarity. That childhood state had arisen naturally, without force, without the power extreme measures he was now inflicting upon himself. This realization marked a crucial turning point. The path to liberation lay neither in sensual indulgence, as his palace life had demonstrated, nor in self-mortification, as his ascetic practices had proven. There must be a middle way, a path of balance that developed both mental clarity and physical strength. Siddhartha accepted a bowl of rice milk from a woman named Sujata, breaking his extreme fast. His 5 companions, witnessing this, believed he had abandoned the quest. They denounced him and left. But Siddhartha had not given up. He had simply discovered something profound about the nature of effective spiritual practice. The body and mind are not enemies to be conquered. They are instruments that require care and proper use. Starve the body too severely, and the mind cannot concentrate. Indulge it too freely, and the mind becomes clouded by desire. The path required balance, the skillful maintenance of conditions that allow clear seeing. With renewed strength and determination, Siddhartha made his way to a grove beside the Neranjara River, to the place now known as Bodh Gaya. There stood a particular tree, a Ficus religiosa, known to later generations as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. Siddhartha spread a bundle of grass beneath its branches and sat down in meditation. He made a vow, according to the traditional accounts, that he would not rise from that spot until he had penetrated the deepest truths of existence, until he had found the answer to suffering, until he had achieved complete liberation, or died in the attempt. What followed was one of the most momentous nights in human spiritual history. Tradition describes this night with both realistic detail and mythological grandeur. Siddhartha sat in deepening concentration as dusk turned to darkness. His mind became steady, focused, clear. Then, according to the legends, Mara arrived, the personification of all the forces that keep beings trapped in suffering. Mara represents delusion, desire, fear, everything that prevents liberation. First, Mara sent his 3 daughters, personifications of discontent, delight, and thirst, to tempt Siddhartha away from his meditation through sensual allure. Siddhartha remained unmoved. The desires that once might have shaken him had lost their power. Then Mara sent his armies, demons wielding weapons, attempting to frighten Siddhartha into abandoning his quest through fear of death. The seated figure did not flinch. Fear of death, fear of pain, these two had lost their grip. Finally, Mara tried one last strategy, the most insidious of all. He challenged Siddhartha's right to sit under this tree, to seek enlightenment, to claim liberation. "Who are you?" Mara demanded. "What do you think you can achieve what no one else has achieved? What authority do you have? Who will witness your attainment?" In response, Siddhartha reached down with his right hand and touched the earth. The earth itself, the ground beneath him, would be his witness. This gesture, known as the earth-touching mudra, appears in countless Buddhist images. It symbolizes the unshakable foundation of his practice, the accumulated merit of lifetimes of ethical conduct and spiritual striving. Mara fled, and Siddhartha sat on, alone now, except for the night itself. His mind moved through progressively deeper levels of understanding. In the first watch of the night, his consciousness expanded to encompass his previous lives, the countless births he had experienced across immeasurable time. He saw the patterns of karma, how actions in one life shape conditions in the next. He understood the long journey that had brought him to this moment. In the second watch, as midnight passed, His vision extended to observe the deaths and rebirths of all beings. He saw the vast web of causation, how selfish actions lead to suffering in future states, how generous and ethical actions lead to happiness. He perceived the moral structure of the universe, not as imposed law, but as natural consequence. The universe operates according to principles as reliable as gravity, and those principles center on the effects of intentional action. Then, in the third watch, as dawn approached, came the deepest realization of all. Siddhartha perceived the chain of dependent origination, the 12 linked causes that bind beings to the will of rebirth. Ignorance leads to mental formations, which lead to consciousness, which leads to name and form, which leads to the 6 sense bases, which lead to contact, which leads to feeling, which leads to craving, which leads to clinging, which leads to becoming, which leads to birth, which leads to aging and death. This chain, repeated endlessly, is the mechanism of suffering. And with this understanding came its reverse. If ignorance is the root cause, then knowledge can uproot it. If craving binds beings to suffering, then the cessation of craving brings freedom. The chain can be broken. Liberation is possible, not through appeasing gods, not through ritual, not through philosophical speculation, but through direct understanding of how suffering arises and how it can cease. As the morning star appeared in the eastern sky, Siddhartha Gautama achieved complete enlightenment. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. The man who had sat down in confusion and determination stood up in complete clarity and peace. He had discovered what he sought. The path to the end of suffering lay open before him, and now it was his to share. The Buddha spent the next 45 years teaching what he had discovered that night. He walked the dusty roads of ancient India, speaking to whoever would listen. Kings and beggars, merchants and monks, housewives and courtesans, all came to hear his teachings. The verses that would eventually form the Dhammapada emerged from these countless encounters, each one a response to a specific question, a particular confusion, a moment of teaching as shaped to meet the needs of the person before him. Mind precedes all, the foundation of experience. The Dhammapada opens with perhaps its most famous verses, 2 paired statements that establish the foundation for everything that follows. These opening lines have been translated many ways, each version attempting to capture the precision of the original Pali while remaining accessible to modern readers. One widely respected translation reads, "Mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-wrought. If with an impure mind a person speaks or acts, suffering follows him like the wheel that follows the foot of the ox. Mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They're all mind-wrought. If with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows him like his never-departing shadow." Let these verses settle for a moment. Read them again, slowly. Mind precedes all mental states. What does this mean? The Buddha is not suggesting that the external world does not exist, that reality is merely mental construction. Rather, he is pointing to something more subtle and more profound. Our experience of reality, our subjective encounter with life, is fundamentally shaped by the quality of our mind. Consider what happens when you wake in a good mood versus a bad mood. The world has not changed. The same room surrounds you. The same tasks await. The same people will cross your path. Yet your experience of that world is utterly different. In a state of contentment, small annoyances barely register. In a state of irritation, the smallest inconvenience becomes intolerable. The facts remain the chana, but the experience transforms entirely based on the mind's condition. The Buddha understood something that modern psychology is only now beginning to fully appreciate. We do not experience raw reality. We experience our mental representation of reality, filtered through attention, interpretation, memory, expectation, and emotional tone. Two people can witness the exact same event and have completely different experiences of it. One sees an opportunity, the other a threat. One feels joy, the other anxiety. The event is one, but the minds encountering it are different, and so the experiences diverge. This is not solipsism. The ox cart in the metaphor is real. The wheel is real. But the suffering that follows unwholesome action is a feature of how mind and reality interact. When we speak with malice, the words affect others and they affect us. When we act with greed, the consequences ripple outward and return to us. Not because some cosmic judge metes out punishment, but because causation operates through mental and physical channels that are reliable and observable. The imagery of these opening verses is vivid and memorable. The wheel following the ox's foot suggests inexorability. The ox pulls, the wheel follows. There is no gap, no possibility of the wheel straying from its course. Similarly, when mind is corrupted by unwholesome states, hatred, greed, delusion, suffering follows with mechanical certainty. Not sometimes, not usually, always. This is described as natural law, as dependable as physical laws. The second verse presents the complementary truth. Purity of mind leads to happiness with the same inevitability. The shadow metaphor is particularly beautiful. A shadow never leaves its object. Under the sun, wherever you walk, your shadow accompanies you. So too does happiness accompany the person whose mind is established in wholesome states, in loving kindness, generosity, and wisdom. But what is this mind that the Buddha speaks of? In Buddhist psychology, mind is not a thing or substance. It is a process, a stream of mental events arising and passing away with incredible rapidity. Each mental moment includes elements of perception, feeling tone, intention, attention, and consciousness. These elements condition each other and the next moment of mind that arises. An angry thought tends to produce another angry thought. A grateful perception tends to produce more grateful perceptions. The mind is not static, but dynamic, constantly creating itself anew based on what has come before. This understanding has profound implications. If mind were a fixed entity, an unchangeable self, then someone born with unwholesome tendencies would be doomed to suffering. But because mind is a process, because it is conditioned by what we feed it, because it responds to training, transformation is possible. The fool can become wise. The angry person can develop patience. The greedy person can learn generosity. Not easily, not overnight, but through patient cultivation of different mental habits. The verses that immediately follow these opening statements reinforce and elaborate on this foundational teaching. Verse 3 addresses resentment. He abused me, he struck me, he overpowered me, he robbed me. Those who harbor such thoughts do not still their hatred. He abused me, he struck me, he overpowered me, he robbed me. Those who do not harbor such thoughts still their hatred. Here again, we see the power of mind to perpetuate or end suffering. Suppose someone wrongs you. The wrong itself is one event, finished the moment it occurs. But if you mentally rehearse that wrong, replaying the scene, narrating it to yourself and others, feeding resentment through constant mental repetition, then the wrong never ends. It continues to harm you, not through the other person's ongoing action, but through your own mental clinging to the injury. The alternative is not to deny the wrong or suppress your response. It is to see clearly what happened without adding layer upon layer of reactive thinking. The past event cannot be changed, but your present relationship to that past event, that can be transformed. And in that transformation lies freedom from a suffering that would otherwise extend indefinitely. Then comes verse 5, one of the most frequently quoted teachings in all Buddhist literature. Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law, eternal. These words, spoken 25 centuries ago, remain revolutionary. In a world that constantly preaches the righteousness of righteous anger, that justifies revenge as justice, that sees hatred of the hateful as a virtue, the Buddha offers a radically different vision. Hatred perpetuates itself. Responding to hatred with more hatred does not solve the problem. It multiplies it. This is not a call for passivity in the face of injustice. The Buddha was not suggesting we ignore harm or fail to establish appropriate boundaries. Rather, he is pointing to an emotional and cognitive pattern that causes unnecessary suffering. When someone acts from hatred toward me, if I respond with my own hatred, I have doubled the amount of hatred in the world. More importantly, I have allowed the other person's mental poison to become my own. I have let their suffering create suffering in me. The alternative, non-hatred, does not mean liking or approving. It means refusing to take on the poisonous emotion, refusing to let someone else's suffering generate identical suffering in oneself. This is incredibly difficult. It requires remarkable mental discipline and ethical courage. Yet the Buddha describes it as an eternal law, not as a nice sentiment or a high ideal, but as a fundamental truth about how the mind operates. Hatred burns the person who harbors it far more than it burns its intended target. This is not metaphor, but observable fact. Chronic anger and resentment create measurable physiological stress, contribute to countless health problems, poison relationships, and generate a persistent subjective state of agitation. The person who is hated may never know of your hatred, may be entirely unaffected by it. But you, carrying that hatred, suffer its effects continuously. The opening chapter of the Dhammapada continues with verse after verse exploring these fundamental dynamics of mind. Verse 6 reminds us of mortality. There are those who do not realize that one day we all must die. But those who do realize this settle their quarrels. Awareness of death, rather than being morbid or depressing, can be a source of clarity and urgency. When we truly understand the fragility and brevity of life, petty conflicts lose their power. Why waste precious time in pointless argument? Why nurse grudges when life is so short? This is not defeatism, but realism, a recognition that makes space for what truly matters. Subsequent verses warn against negligence and promote the cultivation of wholesome mental states. They use striking metaphors. Just as rain penetrates a poorly thatched roof, passion penetrates an undeveloped mind. But a well-developed mind, like a properly thatched roof, remains protected even in the storm of difficult circumstances. The imagery is rustic and practical, drawn from everyday life in ancient India, yet the psychological insight is timeless. The evildoer suffers in this life and the next, the verses tell us, not because of divine punishment, but because of the natural consequences of unwholesome action. Meanwhile, the doer of good rejoices both here and hereafter, delighting in the memory of pure deeds. Again, cause and effect, action and consequence, mind and experience, all bound together in reliable patterns. The chapter closes by distinguishing between mere intellectual knowledge and embodied practice. Little, though, he recites the sacred texts, but puts the teaching into practice, forsaking lust, hatred, and delusion, with true wisdom and emancipated mind, clinging to nothing of this or any other world, he indeed partakes of the blessings of a holy life. This verse contains a gentle critique of the priesthood of the Buddha's day, the Brahmins who memorized vast quantities of Vedic scripture, but did not necessarily embody the ethical principles those scriptures taught. It is a reminder that study, while valuable, is only the beginning. Knowledge must transform into wisdom through practice. Understanding must become realization through direct experience. It's not enough to know that hatred is harmful. One must actually abandon hatred in one's own heart. These opening verses establish the foundation for everything that follows in the Dhammapada. They tell us that mind matters more than we realize, that our subjective experience is not imposed upon us, but shaped by how we relate to events. That transformation is possible, that ethical cause and effect operate with law-like regularity, and that the path to freedom requires more than intellectual assent. It requires the patient, difficult, ongoing work of cultivating wholesome mental states while abandoning unwholesome ones. The Four Noble Truths, the framework of liberation. The opening chapter of the Dhammapada points toward the fundamental structure of the Buddha's teaching, but it is worth pausing to explore that structure explicitly. Everything the Buddha taught can be understood through the framework of the Four Noble Truths. The realization that transformed him from seeker to awakened one during that pivotal night beneath the Bodhi tree. These four truths are not mere doctrines to be believed. They are invitations to observe reality directly, to see for oneself what the Buddha saw. They function both as diagnosis and prescription, first identifying the problem and then offering the cure. In medical terms, they describe the symptom, identify the disease, confirm the possibility of health, and prescribe the treatment. They are, in essence, the Buddha's answer to the fundamental human problem of suffering. The first noble truth is the truth of dukkha. The Pali word dukkha is notoriously difficult to translate. It is often rendered as suffering, but that English word does not capture the full range of meaning. Dukkha includes obvious suffering, physical pain, emotional distress, the anguish of loss. But it also includes subtler forms of dissatisfaction, the restlessness we feel even in pleasant circumstances, the way happiness always seems to slip through our fingers, the pervasive sense that something is not quite right, that no matter what we achieve or acquire, it is never quite enough. The Buddha's insight was not that life contains no pleasure or happiness. He was not a pessimist, claiming that all experience is negative. Rather, he observed that even pleasant experiences are dukkha in a deeper sense because they are impermanent. The meal that delights us will end. The relationship that brings joy will change. The achievement that fills us with pride will fade into memory. And our very attachment to these pleasant experiences, our desperate grasping to make them last, to repeat them, to hold on to them, this clinging itself becomes a source of suffering. Birth is dukkha, Aging is dukkha. Illness is dukkha. Death is dukkha. Separation from what we love is dukkha. Association with what we dislike is dukkha. Not getting what we want is dukkha. In short, the 5 aggregates of clinging, the components of personal existence: body, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, are dukkha when we cling to them as if they were permanent and ultimately satisfying. This first truth asks us to look honestly at our experience, not to wallow in suffering, not to become depressed or nihilistic, but simply to acknowledge what is actually happening. How much of your mental energy goes into trying to hold on to pleasant experiences that are naturally fading? How much anxiety arises from fear of losing what you have? How much frustration from the gap between how things are and how you want them to be? The first noble truth invites us to see this pattern clearly. The second noble truth identifies the cause of dukkha. It is tanha, often translated as craving, thirst, or selfish desire. This is not desire itself, not the simple wish for food when hungry or rest when tired. Tanha is specifically the grasping, clinging, obsessive quality of desire that refuses to accept reality as it is. It is wanting things to be different than they are. It is the attachment that turns natural preferences into sources of suffering. Tanha manifests in 3 primary forms. The first is craving for sensual pleasures, the endless seeking after pleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and mental experiences. The second is craving for existence, the deep-seated desire to be someone important, to matter, to secure one's identity against the threat of insignificance. The third is craving for non-existence, the wish to escape, to not be, the desire to annihilate unpleasant experiences or even oneself. These cravings drive the wheel of samsara, the cycle of birth and death, around and around. When we die, according to Buddhist teaching, if craving remains, it pulls consciousness toward a new birth appropriate to the karma we have accumulated, and the new life begins the cycle again. Birth leads to aging and death, which leads to craving for continued or different existence, which leads to new birth, on, unless the chain is broken. But here is the crucial insight of the second noble truth. Suffering has a cause. It is not random, not meaningless, not inflicted by malevolent forces beyond our control. It arises from identifiable mental processes, specifically from craving and the ignorance that underlies craving. And because suffering has a cause, it is potentially within our power to address that cause. This leads directly to the third noble truth, the truth of cessation. Dukkha can end. Liberation is possible. There is a state of being in which craving has been extinguished, in which the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion have been quenched. This state is called nibbana in Pali, nirvana in Sanskrit. It is not annihilation, not the end of consciousness, but the end of suffering. It is the unconditioned, the deathless, the ultimate peace. Nibbana is difficult to describe in positive terms because it is defined primarily by what it is not. It is not subject to aging, not subject to decay, not subject to death. It is not created, not conditioned, not dependent on causes. It is freedom from the compulsions of craving, from the tyranny of self-centered fear and desire. It is the shore beyond the flood of existence, the island refuge, the safe haven. The Buddha described multiple stages on the path to Nibbana. The first is stream entry, when a practitioner gains their first direct insight into the unconditioned and becomes established irreversibly on the path to liberation. Such a person will be reborn at most 7 more times before achieving complete freedom. The second stage is once returning, when the practitioner will take birth at most 1 more time. The third is non-returning, when one will never again be born in the human realm, instead attaining liberation from a celestial realm. And the fourth and final stage is arahantship, complete liberation achieved in this very life. The fact that liberation happens in stages offers encouragement. You do not need to achieve perfect enlightenment immediately. Each stage of progress brings measurable relief from suffering. The stream enter has already eliminated certain deeply rooted defilements. The once returner has weakened others significantly. Progress is possible, and each step forward is genuine progress, even if the goal is not yet reached. The fourth noble truth presents the path to liberation. It is the Magga, the way, specifically the Noble Eightfold Path. This is not merely ethical guidelines or meditation instructions, though it includes both. It is a comprehensive training program that addresses every aspect of human existence: speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration, view, and intention. The 8 factors of the path are traditionally grouped into 3 categories, corresponding to the threefold training. Wisdom includes right view and right intention. Ethical conduct includes right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Mental discipline includes right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These 3 work together, supporting and reinforcing each other. Ethical conduct creates the stability needed for meditation. Meditation develops the concentration needed for insight. Insight transforms one's view of reality, which then motivates deeper ethical commitment and more sustained meditative effort. Right view, the first factor, means seeing reality as it actually is. This includes understanding the 4 noble truths themselves, understanding karma and its effects, understanding impermanence, and ultimately understanding the not-self nature of all phenomena. Right view is not mere philosophical belief. It is direct, experiential understanding that transforms how one lives. Right intention follows from right view. When you see clearly the consequences of unwholesome mental states, the intention to abandon them arises naturally. Right intention includes the intention to renounce sensual grasping, the intention to practice loving kindness rather than ill will, and the intention to practice harmlessness rather than cruelty. These intentions shape what we say and do. Right speech means abstaining from lying, from divisive speech that breaks relationships, from harsh words that wound unnecessarily, and from idle chatter that wastes time and energy. Positively, right speech means speaking truth, speaking words that promote harmony, speaking gently, and speaking only what is beneficial and timely. Right action means ethical conduct in the realm of physical deeds. It includes abstaining from killing, from stealing, and from sexual misconduct. Positively, it means protecting life, practicing generosity, and conducting relationships with respect and integrity. Right livelihood extends ethical conduct to one's work life. It means avoiding occupations that cause harm, trades in weapons, intoxicants, poisons, or anything that profits from others' suffering. Positively, it means earning one's living in ways that benefit, or at least do not harm others. Right effort is the energetic commitment to the path. It has 4 aspects. First is the effort to prevent unwholesome mental states that have not yet arisen. Second is the effort to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. Third is the effort to cultivate wholesome states that have not yet risen. Fourth is in the effort to maintain and strengthen wholesome states that have already arisen. This fourfold effort shapes the mind over time, gradually shifting its habitual patterns in a wholesome direction. Right mindfulness is the continuous, non-judgmental awareness of present experience. The Buddha taught 4 foundations of mindfulness: mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mental objects or phenomena. By establishing mindfulness, we see clearly what is actually happening in our experience, rather than living in mental commentary, fantasy, and habitual reaction. Right concentration is the development of meditative absorption, states of deep mental unification where the scattered energies of mind gather into powerful focus. These concentrated states, called jhanas, bring profound peace and joy. More importantly, they sharpen the mind into an instrument capable of penetrating insight. From the stable platform of concentration, wisdom can arise. The Eightfold Path is not meant to be followed linearly, completing one factor before moving to the next. Rather, all 8 factors develop together, each supporting the others. As you practice mindfulness, you become more aware of your speech and actions, leading naturally to greater ethical care. As you observe ethical guidelines, the mind becomes less agitated by guilt and regret, making concentration easier. As concentration develops, deeper insight arises, transforming your view. And as your view transforms, your intentions shift, your speech becomes more skillful, your actions more aligned with wisdom. The Dhammapada embodies this framework throughout its verses. Though it does not present the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path in systematic form, every teaching it offers can be understood as an elaboration of these fundamental truths. The verses on the mind explore the causes of suffering. The verses on ethical conduct detail right speech and right action. The verses on heedfulness and mindfulness point to right effort and right mindfulness. The verses on the Arahant describe what it means to complete the path and realize Nibbana. Heedfulness, the foundation of progress. Chapter 2 of the Dhammapada, titled On Vigilance or On Heedfulness, presents what might be called the psychological engine of the spiritual path. If the 4 Noble Truths provide the conceptual framework and the Eightfold Path provides the practical structure, heedfulness is the quality of attention that makes actual progress possible. Without heedfulness, all the teachings in the world remain merely ideas, intellectual ornaments that never transform actual experience. The chapter opens with verses 21 and 22, statements so direct and powerful that they have shaped Buddhist practice for millennia. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The heedful do not die. The heedless are as if dead already. Earnest among the thoughtless, awake among the sleepers, the wise one advances like a swift horse, leaving behind a slow one. Heedfulness, in Pali Appamada, refers to a quality of alert, mindful attention to what one is doing, thinking, and experiencing. It is the opposite of sleepwalking through life, of living on autopilot, of being carried along by habit and reaction without awareness. The heedful person pays attention. They notice what they are thinking, what they are feeling, what they are about to say or do. This noticing creates a space between stimulus and response, between impulse and action, and in that space, lies the possibility of choice. When the Buddha speaks of heedfulness as the path to the deathless, he's not referring to physical immortality. He means the deathless state of nibbana, liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Heedfulness is the path to this deathless state, because it is only through sustained, careful attention that one can observe the arising and passing of mental phenomena clearly enough to see through the illusion of self, to recognize impermanence directly, to understand the process by which suffering comes to be. Heedlessness, by contrast, is spiritual death. The person who goes through life without reflection, who never questions their reactions, who remains unconscious of their mental processes, such a person is technically alive, but in another sense, already dead. They are a biological machine running programs, not a conscious agent capable of genuine choice. The opportunity for liberation passes them by because they never wake up to their own experience. The verses emphasize that those who understand this do not wait until tomorrow to begin practice. There is no time to waste. Death could come at any moment. The brief window of human existence, precious and fragile, must be used wisely. The heedful practitioner moves with urgency, not out of anxiety, but out of clear understanding. Every moment of unconsciousness is a moment lost. Every moment of awareness is the opportunity. Verse 25 offers a striking analogy. By heedfulness did Indra become the overlord of the gods. Heedfulness is ever praised, and heedlessness is ever despised. Indra, in the Vedic and Hindu tradition, is the king of the gods. According to Buddhist reinterpretation, Indra did not achieve his exalted position through birth or power, but through the practice of heedfulness in previous lives. Even divine status, this verse suggests, comes not from external circumstances, but from the quality of attention one brings to existence. If the King of Gods achieved his position through heedfulness, how much more should ordinary beings value this quality? The following verses continue to elaborate through metaphor and direct statement. A monk who delights in heedfulness will not fall away from the path. They are approaching nibbana. The heedful person is like someone standing on a mountaintop, looking down at the mass of people wandering in confusion below. From the height of awareness, one can see patterns and dangers that are invisible to those caught in heedlessness. The wise person protects heedfulness as the supreme treasure. This is not poetry, but precise psychological instruction. In the moments when you notice yourself about to speak harshly, that noticing is heedfulness. It creates the possibility of choosing different words. When you observe anger arising in response to a slight, that observation is heedfulness. It prevents the anger from controlling you. When you catch yourself lost in fantasy or worry, that catching is heedfulness. It allows you to return attention to the present moment. Modern cognitive science and neuroscience have begun to validate what the Buddha observed through direct introspection 25 centuries ago. Most of our behavior is indeed automatic, driven by habits formed in the past. The brain defaults to well-worn neural pathways, responding to current situations based on past conditioning. But awareness, the observing function of consciousness, can interrupt these automatic responses. When we notice what we are doing, we gain the ability to do something different. This is why meditation practice in Buddhism places such emphasis on mindfulness. The word itself, sati in Pali, means remembering, keeping something in mind, maintaining awareness. When you sit in meditation, observing the breath, You are not trying to achieve some special state of consciousness. You are practicing the simple act of noticing. The mind wanders, which it will do thousands of times. You notice the wandering. You return attention to the breath. This cycle, repeated over and over, strengthens the capacity for heedfulness. But the Dhammapada makes clear that heedfulness is not limited to meditation. It must extend to all aspects of life. Verse 31 warns against indulging in sensual pleasures at the expense of awareness. Verse 32 encourages meditating in forest groves and secluded places where external distractions are minimal. Yet even in solitude, even in the most supportive environment, practice requires sustained effort. The chapter also addresses the social dimension of heedfulness. Verse 28 states, "Heedful among the heedless, wide awake among the sleepy, the wise person advances like a swift horse, leaving behind a slow one." This verse acknowledges a difficult reality. Most people around you will not value heedfulness. They will pursue distraction, seek constant entertainment, avoid uncomfortable self-examination. Living with heedfulness in a heedless culture requires independence of mind, the willingness to value something that others dismiss or mock. The practitioner who maintains awareness while others sleep walks, advances. The verse promises, like a fast horse overtaking slower ones. Yet there is no arrogance in this. The swift horse does not despise the slow horses. It simply runs its race. Similarly, the person practicing heedfulness is not judging others as inferior. They are simply recognizing that different beings are at different stages of understanding, and one must follow one's own path regardless of what others choose. This is particularly relevant in contemporary life, where attention itself has become a battlefield. Every advertisement, every social media platform, every algorithm is designed to capture and hold your awareness, to interrupt heedfulness with carefully engineered distractions. The result is an epidemic of what might be called cultural heedlessness, where people move through life in a fog of semi-attention, never quite present, never quite absent, constantly stimulated, yet never truly satisfied. Against this tide, the practice of heedfulness becomes almost countercultural, a form of gentle rebellion. To sit quietly without checking your phone is an act of resistance. To notice your own thoughts rather than immediately believing them is a radical act. To pause before reacting is to assert your human dignity against the mechanical reflexes that modern life encourages. The Dhammapada does not promise that heedfulness is easy. It promises that it is necessary. Verse after verse in this chapter emphasizes the same theme with variations. The diligent overcome death, meaning they achieve the deathless. The heedless do not even reach life, meaning they waste their existence in unconsciousness. The wise meditate diligently, persevering steadfastly, and they experience nibbana, the incomparable freedom from bondage. The chapter closes with verse 32, offering practical guidance. The monk who delights in heedfulness and looks with fear at heedlessness will not fall. They are close to nibbana. Note that fear is mentioned here not as neurotic anxiety, but as healthy respect for the consequences of heedlessness. Just as you would naturally fear a cliff edge and step carefully, so should the practitioner recognize the danger of losing awareness. Heedlessness leads to unskillful actions, which lead to suffering, which perpetuates the cycle of rebirth. This is genuinely dangerous, worthy of healthy caution. Yet the primary emotion to be cultivated is not fear, but delight. The monk, or any practitioner, who delights in heedfulness, has discovered something precious. They have found that being awake to life, even when life is difficult, is better than sleepwalking through comfort. They have tasted the joy of presence, the satisfaction of meeting each moment with awareness rather than habit. This delight sustains practice when discipline alone would fail. Wisdom and folly. Two ways of being. The Dhammapada returns repeatedly to the contrast between the wise and the foolish. Chapters 5 and 6 focus specifically on these two types, but references to wisdom and folly appear throughout the text. This is not mere moralizing or judgmental categorization. The Buddha is describing two fundamentally different ways of relating to existence, two patterns of thought and action that lead to radically different outcomes. The fool in Buddhist teaching is not someone of low intelligence. Intellectual cleverness and spiritual wisdom are entirely different qualities. The fool might be highly educated, sophisticated in worldly affairs, successful by conventional standards. What makes someone a fool in the Buddhist sense is their relationship to suffering. The fool does not learn from experience. They repeat the same unskillful actions, expecting different results. They chase pleasures that bring only temporary satisfaction. They remain blind to the consequences of their choices. Verse 64 states the problem precisely. Though all his life, a fool associates with a wise person, he no more comprehends the Dhamma than a spoon tastes the flavour of the soup. This is a devastating image. The spoon sits in the soup constantly. It carries the soup from pot to mouth. Yet it never tastes anything. Similarly, the fool might be surrounded by wise teachings, might hear the Dhamma explained again and again, might even memorize verses and suttas, yet the meaning never penetrates. Why? Because genuine understanding requires more than intellectual processing. It requires a willingness to change, to let go of cherished beliefs, to face uncomfortable truths about oneself. The fool is characterized by certain identifiable traits. They seek undeserved reputation and praise. They desire authority without having earned wisdom. They want the respect due to holy people while continuing to live selfishly. They pursue gain at the expense of others, caring only about immediate advantage. These behaviors all stem from the same root, a desperate attempt to shore up the sense of self, to make oneself important, to secure one's identity against the threat of insignificance. But this project is doomed from the start. The self the fool seeks to aggrandize is itself an illusion, a convenient fiction that does not correspond to reality. Pursuing the aggrandizement of an illusion can only lead to more confusion and suffering. The fool, in their very efforts to secure happiness, creates the conditions for unhappiness. Verse 68 describes the fool's anguish. As milk does not turn at once, so also does evil not bring immediate results. Like fire covered with ashes, it follows the fool, burning him along the way. This verse addresses a common confusion. Why do bad actions sometimes seem to go unpunished? Why do unethical people often appear to prosper? The answer is that the consequences of action are not always immediate. Milk does not sour the instant it is exposed to heat. Fire covered with ash does not flame up immediately. But the process has begun, and the result is inevitable. For the fool, this delayed consequence is particularly dangerous, because they do not see immediate negative results from their unskillful actions. They assume they have gotten away with something. They become bolder in their selfishness. Yet, all the while, like covered fire, the karmic consequence is working, accumulating, preparing to manifest. When it finally does, the fool is unprepared, shocked, unable to understand why their life has turned bitter. The verses warn that for a fool, learning itself can become dangerous. Verse 72 states, "To his ruin, the fool gains knowledge and fame. It destroys his bright nature and cleaves his head." Why would knowledge be harmful? Because the fool uses knowledge to serve the ego, to bolster self-importance, to look down on others. Learning becomes a source of pride rather than humility. Fame increases attachment rather than encouraging detachment. The bright nature, the innate potential for awakening that all beings possess, becomes obscured by the very accomplishments the fool thought would bring happiness. Verse 79 offers a medical metaphor. A fool who knows his foolishness is wise at least to that extent, but a fool who thinks himself wise is a fool indeed. Here is a surprising twist. The person who recognizes their own confusion has taken the first step toward wisdom. Self-awareness, even when what one sees is not flattering, opens the possibility of change. But the fool who believes themselves wise has no such opportunity. They are locked in delusion, certain of their rightness, closed to learning. This is why humility is so crucial on the spiritual path. The moment you think you have attained wisdom, that thought itself demonstrates you have not. Genuine wisdom includes awareness of how much remains unknown, how easily one can be mistaken, how constantly vigilance is required. The truly wise person does not strut with confidence. They walk carefully, knowing the path is subtle and mistakes are easy. In contrast to the fool, the wise person in the Dhammapada is characterized by several key qualities. They learn from experience, seeing cause and effect clearly. They restrain themselves from impulsive reactions. They seek out good teachers and companions. They value truth over comfort. They practice what they preach. They show equanimity in the face of praise and blame. They harm no living being. They give up what is unwholesome and cultivate what is wholesome. Verse 76 describes the wise person's relationship to correction. Should one find a person who points out one's faults and reproves one should follow such a wise and sagacious person as one would a guide to hidden treasure. It is always better, never worse, to cultivate such an association. Think about this. How do you typically respond when someone points out your mistakes? For most of us, the immediate reaction is defensiveness, justification, perhaps counterattack. We do not like being corrected. It feels like an attack on our competence, our worth. But the verse asks us to reverse this reaction completely. The person who shows us our faults is offering treasure, revealing blind spots, giving us the information we need to grow. This does not mean accepting every criticism uncritically. Some criticism is unfair, malicious, or simply wrong. But the wise person examines criticism for the grain of truth it might contain, rather than dismissing it because it feels uncomfortable. They understand that growth requires feedback, that we cannot see ourselves clearly without the mirror of others' perceptions. The wise person, according to verse 80, is compared to a rock that storms cannot shake. Just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame. This is not indifference, but equanimity. The wise person does not become intoxicated by praise, inflated by success, or devastated by criticism. They understand that praise and blame are merely sounds, opinions, mental constructions in the minds of others. These cannot touch one's essential being unless one grants them that power. This equanimity comes not from suppressing feeling, but from seeing clearly. When you understand that praise arises from conditions and will pass, that blame arises from conditions and will pass, then neither can disturb your peace. Verse 81 adds another dimension. On hearing the teachings, the wise become perfectly purified, like a deep, clear, still lake. This image of the clear lake recurs throughout Buddhist literature. A lake is clear when undisturbed by wind, when no mud clouds the water. Similarly, the mind becomes clear when not stirred by craving and aversion, when not clouded by confusion. And in that clarity, wisdom arises naturally. You do not have to manufacture wisdom through effort. You have to remove the obscurations that prevent natural clarity from manifesting. The wise person also understands impermanence deeply. Verse 82 notes, the good renounce attachment to everything. The virtuous do not prattle with yearning for pleasures. The wise show no elation or depression when touched by happiness or sorrow. This might sound like emotional flatness, but it describes something else entirely. The wise person experiences the full range of human emotion, pleasant and unpleasant, but without the added layer of craving or aversion. Happy things happen, and happiness arises naturally. Sad things happen, and sadness arises naturally. But there is no desperate grasping to make the happy things permanent, no bitter resistance to the presence of sadness. This allows emotions to move through like weather, arising and passing, without becoming fixed states of being. The chapter on the wise includes several verses about the value of solitude. Verse 61 advises, if a seeker does not find a companion who is better or equal, let them resolutely pursue a solitary course. There is no fellowship with a fool. This may seem harsh, but it reflects a practical reality. The people we spend time with shape our thoughts, values, and behaviors. If you wish to develop wisdom but surround yourself with fools, their influence will constantly pull you away from practice. Better to be alone than in company that reinforces ignorance. This does not mean being unfriendly or dismissive. It means being discerning about where you place your attention and energy. Yet, when good company is available, it is precious beyond measure. The wise person seeks out wise teachers, spiritual friends, fellow travelers on the path. The Buddha himself emphasized the importance of good companionship, calling it not just part of the holy life, but the whole of it. We learn through example, through conversation, through the challenge and support of those further along the path. The transition from fool to wise person is possible. No one is doomed to remain confused forever. The very fact that you are reading this, that you have some interest in Buddhist teaching, indicates that seeds of wisdom are present. The question is whether those seeds will be watered through practice or allowed to remain dormant. This is why the Dhammapada spends so much time on these contrasts. Not to divide people into categories, not to create hierarchy, but to show clearly what leads to suffering and what leads to freedom. The characteristics of the fool are not external judgments, but observable patterns of thought and behavior that reliably produce unhappiness. The characteristics of the wise person are equally observable patterns that reliably produce peace. The text invites us to examine our own minds. Where do we find foolish patterns? Where are we cultivating wisdom? What needs to be abandoned? What needs to be developed? The journey to nirvana liberation beyond words. Throughout the Dhammapada, references to nirvana appear like signposts marking the direction toward ultimate freedom. Yet nirvana itself remains elusive to language, difficult to describe, resistant to conceptualization. This is not accidental. The entire Buddhist path points toward a reality that transcends the categories of thought and language that we use to navigate ordinary experience. Understanding nirvana requires not just intellectual study, but direct experience, and the Dhammapada offers glimpses of what that experience entails. The word nirvana, or nibbana in Pali, literally means blowing out or extinguishing, like a flame going out when the fuel is consumed. What is extinguished is not existence itself, but the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. These three poisons keep the wheel of samsara turning, pulling consciousness from birth to death to birth again. When these fires are completely extinguished, when craving ceases entirely, the person is liberated. They have reached the unconditioned, the deathless, the further shore. Verse 184 offers a characteristically terse definition. To avoid all evil, to cultivate good, to purify one's mind, this is the teaching of all Buddhas. This verse, repeated as fundamental instruction, outlines the path in its simplest form. Avoiding evil means refraining from actions that cause harm to oneself or others. Cultivating good means actively developing wholesome mental states and performing beneficial actions. Purifying the mind means the deep transformative work of meditation and wisdom that ultimately leads to liberation. Every practice in Buddhism can be understood as falling under one of these three headings. But what is the experience of nirvana itself? The Dhammapada provides various descriptions, each approaching the mystery from a different angle. Verse 203 speaks of health as the highest gain, contentment as the highest wealth, trust as the best of kin, and nibbana as the highest bliss. This places nirvana in the experiential realm of bliss, but a bliss unlike temporary pleasures. This is the permanent end of dissatisfaction, the ultimate happiness that arises not from favorable external circumstances, but from complete internal freedom. Verse 23 uses different language. The wise meditate diligently, persevering steadfastly, experiencing nibbana, the incomparable freedom from bondage. Freedom from bondage. This phrase captures something essential. What are we bound by? Attachment to sense pleasures, attachment to views and opinions, attachment to ritual and wrong beliefs, attachment to the illusion of self. These bonds are subtle. They do not feel like chains. They feel like us, like our preferences and personality. Yet they bind us to suffering as surely as physical shackles. When these bonds are broken, what remains is an openness, a spaciousness, a freedom to meet each moment without the weight of accumulated conditioning. Verse 204 describes those who have crossed over. The wise person who has crossed the flood and followed the Dhamma for freeing themselves, having reached the other shore, are called among the wise utterly free. The metaphor of crossing water, reaching the other shore, traversing the flood, appears repeatedly in Buddhist literature. Samsara, the cycle of birth and death, is like a raging river or stormy ocean. Most beings are swept along by its current, tossed by its waves, drowning in its depths. The Buddhist path is like building a boat, learning to navigate, and finally crossing to the far shore of nirvana. Once on that shore, the boat is no longer needed. The practices that carried you across can be released. But what is on that other shore? The texts remain tantalizingly vague. Verse 218 says, "He whose appetites have been stilled, who's not absorbed in enjoyment, who has perceived void and unconditioned freedom, his path is difficult to understand, like that of birds in the air. Birds leave no footprints in the sky. Similarly, the fully liberated person leaves no trace that can be followed by conceptual thinking. Their path cannot be tracked because it does not exist within the conventional categories we use to organize experience. This is why nirvana is sometimes described through negations. It is not this, not that, not anything that can be grasped by ordinary mind. Yet this does not make nirvana merely nothing. The void mentioned here is not nihilistic emptiness. It is the void of all limiting concepts, all constraining identifications. When you no longer identify with this body as me, with these thoughts as mine, with this collection of memories and plans as myself, then what remains? The texts suggest something difficult to articulate, a presence that is fully aware yet not identified with anything in particular, a consciousness that knows without clinging, that experiences without craving. The liberated person, according to verse 91, exerts themselves, their mind focused on nibbana. Those who are wise and meditative, who delight in the calm of renunciation, even the gods hold such mindful, exalted ones dear. This verse reveals that nirvana is not escape from the world, but a different way of being in the world. The liberated person still acts, still interacts, still lives a life. But that life is no longer driven by craving, no longer organized around defending and promoting a self. The result is a natural radiance, a peace that others recognize and are drawn to. Even the gods, powerful beings in the Buddhist cosmology, revere such people because liberation is rarer and more precious than any amount of worldly or heavenly power. Chapter 24, titled Craving, explores in detail what must be relinquished to reach nirvana. The verses warn that craving grows like a vine when fed, that it creates suffering as long as even the subtlest thread remains. Verse 3, 141 describes the danger. Craving grows in the person who harbors it, like a creeper in the forest. They leap from existence to existence, like a monkey seeking fruit in the trees. This image of the monkey swinging from branch to branch, never settling, always seeking, perfectly captures the restless quality of craving. The monkey grasps one branch to swing to another. The moment it reaches the new branch, it is already looking for the next. There is no arrival, no satisfaction, only endless seeking. This is the nature of existence driven by craving. To reach nirvana, all this craving must be abandoned, not suppressed, not temporarily set aside, but uprooted completely. This is extraordinarily difficult, which is why the Buddha spent 45 years teaching various methods and approaches suited to different temperaments and capacities. Yet the goal remains the same, the complete cessation of craving, leading to the complete cessation of suffering. Verse 172 offers a beautiful description of this transformation. They who have gone from bright to dark, from dark to bright, from both bright and dark to neither, have destroyed all craving. They know no agitation. They have cut all bonds. These are called the Supreme People. This cryptic verse refers to stages of spiritual development. Moving from bright to dark might mean falling from a high state to a low one through wrong action. Moving from dark to bright means rising from ignorance to understanding. But the ultimate stage is beyond both bright and dark. beyond all dualistic categorization. In that state, there is no more seeking light and avoiding darkness, no more clinging to pleasant experience and resisting unpleasant. There is simply the clear awareness that knows all states without being bound by any of them. The person who reaches this point has destroyed craving, cut all bonds, achieved supreme status. Not supreme in the sense of superior to others, but supreme in the sense of having completed the journey, having reached the goal all beings ultimately seek, even when they do not recognize it as such. The chapter on happiness explores similar themes. Verse 200 describes the joy that comes from touching the truth, the bliss of a holy life, the bliss of contentment with little, the bliss of the truth we have heard, the bliss of seeing all things clearly. These are the 4 highest forms of bliss in the world. Notice that these joys do not depend on external circumstances. They arise from internal development. The holy life brings bliss not because it earns rewards, but because it is a life aligned with truth. Contentment brings bliss not because one has nothing, but because one wants nothing. Understanding the teachings brings bliss because confusion lifts. Seeing clearly brings bliss because reality, when met without the distortions of craving and aversion, is fundamentally satisfying. But the highest bliss is nirvana itself. Chapter 18 on impurity contains verse 237. You are now like a withered leaf. The messengers of death are at hand. You stand at the threshold of departure, yet you have made no provision for the journey. This stark reminder of mortality serves not to frighten, but to motivate. Death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. What will matter in that moment is not wealth or status, but the purity and freedom of your mind. Have you made provision for that journey? Have you developed the qualities that will serve you when all external supports fall away? The path to nirvana is presented not as escape from life, but as the fulfillment of life's deepest purpose. We are all seeking happiness, peace, freedom from suffering. The Buddhist path simply makes explicit what has always been implicit in human striving and shows the most direct route to what we truly want. The Arahant, the ideal of complete liberation. Chapters 7 and 26 of the Dhammapada present the figure of the Arahant, the fully liberated person who has completed the journey to nirvana. In chapter 7, this person is called by the Pali name, Arahant, meaning worthy one or perfected one. In chapter 26, the longest chapter in the entire text with 41 verses, the same ideal appears under the name Brahmana, a deliberate reappropriation of a term originally referring to the Hindu priestly caste. The Buddha's use of Brahmana in this chapter represents a subtle but profound critique of the caste system of his day. Traditional Brahmins claim superiority through birth, through family lineage, through ritual knowledge. The Buddha redefines the term completely. True Brahminhood, he teaches, has nothing to do with family or caste. It comes from inner purity, from ethical perfection, from the complete eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion. Anyone, regardless of birth, can become a Brahmana in this spiritual sense, and conversely, someone born into the highest caste who lives selfishly and harms others is no true Brahmana at all. Verse 393 makes this explicit. A person does not become a Brahmana by matted hair, by family, or by birth. In whom there is truth and righteousness, they are blessed, they are a Brahmana. This was radical teaching in the India of 25 centuries ago, and remains relevant today wherever people claim superiority through accidents of birth, nationality, or group membership. What matters, the Buddha insists, is not external markers, but internal reality. Not what category you belong to, but how you live, what you have realized, what you have overcome in yourself. The verses that follow paint a detailed portrait of the Arahant, describing their qualities from multiple angles. They are beyond good and evil, not because they disregard ethics, but because they have transcended the need for rules. Verse 412 states, "They who are beyond good and evil, who travel free from sorrow, who are freed from passion, they are called Brahmanas." How can someone be beyond good and evil without falling into moral relativism or nihilism? The answer lies in understanding what ethical conduct means for the Arahant. The ordinary person follows moral guidelines to avoid bad karmic consequences and accumulate good karma. The Arahant follows no guidelines because there is no longer any possibility of acting unethically. Their mind is so thoroughly purified that unwholesome action cannot arise. They are not restraining themselves from evil. They simply have no impulse toward it. This state might seem unimaginable, but the Dhammapada assures us it is the natural result of complete purification. The Arahant has seen through the illusion of self so thoroughly that self-centered motivation no longer occurs. When there is no self to defend, no ego to inflate, no identity to protect, then what remains is spontaneous compassion and wisdom responding appropriately to each situation. Verse 396 describes their freedom. They, whose influxes are eliminated, who are not attached to food, who have realized the void and unconditioned freedom. Their path is difficult to understand, like that of birds in the air. The influxes, or asavas in Pali, are the deepest levels of mental defilement, the underlying tendencies that perpetuate the cycle of rebirth. These include the influx of sensual desire, the influx of desire for existence, and the influx of ignorance. When these are completely eliminated, the person is free in the most fundamental sense. They are not attached to anything, including food, which stands in for all necessary physical supports. They have realized emptiness, not as a concept, but as direct experience. Another striking characteristic of the Arahant is their imperviousness to praise and blame. Verse 400 mentions this quality. Like the earth, they are not resentful. Like a well-founded pillar, they are steadfast. Like a pool free from mud, they are clear. For such a one, there is no more wandering in samsara. The earth accepts all things without complaint. Garbage and flowers, it receives both equally. The Arahant has that same impartiality. Insults and compliments are just sounds, just mental constructions. They do not disturb inner peace, because there is no self taking them personally. The well-founded pillar stands firm regardless of winds. The clear pool reflects reality without distortion. These images convey a stability and clarity that come from having nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, no anxiety about how one is perceived. The Arahant's relationship to pleasure and pain differs fundamentally from ordinary experience. Verse 414 states, "Those who have passed through this difficult path, cross the ocean of existence, traverse the swamp of delusion, reach the other shore, are meditative, free from craving and doubt, cling to nothing. They have attained Nibbana. Them I call a Brahmana." The path is described as difficult, and indeed it is. Letting go of deeply ingrained mental habits, overcoming powerful cravings, seeing through cherished illusions. All of this requires sustained effort over years or even lifetimes. Yet those who complete the journey experience something beyond all the difficulties that preceded it. The ocean of existence no longer threatens to drown them. The swamp of delusion no longer traps them. They stand on solid ground, in a peace that does not depend on circumstances. Several verses emphasize that the Arahant has overcome anger and all forms of aggression. Verse 406 says, "They who do not kill, they who are free from cruelty, free from enmity, them I call a Brahmana." This is not mere restraint. The Arahant does not suppress the urge to harm. They have no such urge. The very possibility of cruel thought has been eliminated. This comes not from moral effort alone, but from the wisdom that sees all beings as interconnected, that recognizes the futility of harming others, that understands there is no separate self to defend at others' expense. The Arahant also transcends attachment to views and opinions. Verse 408 describes them. They who are free from attachment to sensual desires and all cravings. They who have gone beyond all fetters. Them I call a Brahmana. Attachment to views is considered one of the fetters binding beings to samsara. We identify with our opinions, defend them as if our existence depends on them, create conflict and suffering over differing perspectives. The Arahant has opinions when opinions are useful, but does not identify with them. They hold views lightly, ready to revise in light of new evidence, not invested in being right. The penultimate verse of the chapter offers a comprehensive summary. They who have discarded both good and evil, they who lead a pure life, they who live with understanding in the world, them indeed I call a Brahmana. Again we see the transcendence of conventional categories. The Arahant has gone beyond accumulating merit through good deeds and avoiding demerit through restraint from evil. Not because ethics no longer matter, but because their actions flow naturally from wisdom rather than from calculation of karmic consequences. They lead a pure life, not through effort, but through the spontaneous expression of a pure mind. And they live in the world, not withdrawn into permanent isolation, but engaged with understanding, responding to beings and situations with perfect appropriateness. The final verse, number 423, provides a fitting conclusion. They who are fearless and free, who have gone beyond both merit and demerit, who see the body as a heap of elements, them I call a Brahmana. Fearless because they have nothing left to lose. Free because they have relinquished all clinging. Beyond merit and demerit because they have transcended the whole system of accumulating karma. Seeing the body correctly, not as self, but as a temporary configuration of elements that will dissolve at death. This person, the verse declares, is a true Brahmana, worthy of respect, not because of birth, but because of attainment. These descriptions might seem superhuman, beyond what ordinary people could possibly achieve. And in one sense, they are. The Arahant has accomplished something extraordinary. Yet the Dhammapada emphasizes repeatedly that this extraordinary achievement is available to anyone willing to walk the path with sufficient dedication and time. The Buddha himself was human before enlightenment. The monks and nuns who achieved liberation in his presence were ordinary people, some from privileged backgrounds, others from the lowest social classes. What they shared was commitment to practice and the willingness to persevere through difficulties. The ideal of the arahant serves multiple functions in Buddhist teaching. It provides a clear goal, a destination that gives direction to practice. It demonstrates the possibility of complete liberation, countering despair, or the assumption that suffering is inevitable. It describes in concrete terms what liberation looks like, moving nirvana from abstract concept to lived reality. And it offers inspiration, reminding practitioners that others have walked this path successfully, that what seems impossible is merely difficult, that the destination is worth every challenge encountered along the way. The living tradition, the Dhammapada through time. As we approach the end of our journey through the Dhammapada, it is worth reflecting on how this text has lived through centuries, how it has been received, interpreted, practiced, and transmitted across vastly different cultures and historical periods. The verses we have explored tonight were not written as literature to be appreciated aesthetically, or as philosophy to be debated intellectually. They were spiritual medicine, practical guidance, direct instructions for those seeking liberation from suffering. In the centuries immediately following the Buddha's death, the Dhammapada verses were preserved through communal recitation. Monks would gather regularly to chant the suttas together, ensuring accuracy through collective memory. If one monk made an error, others would correct it. This was not merely religious ritual, but a sophisticated technology for preserving information before writing became common. The verses of the Dhammapada, with their poetic structure and memorable metaphors, were particularly suited to this oral tradition. When the teachings were finally written down, probably in the 1st century BCE in Sri Lanka, the Dhammapada became one of the most copied and studied texts in the Buddhist canon. Monks memorized it as part of their basic education. Lay people heard verses recited at ceremonies marking births, deaths, and other life transitions. The text became woven into the fabric of Buddhist cultures throughout Southeast Asia. In Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, the Dhammapada has maintained its central place for more than 2,000 years. Children learn verses in school. Adults consult the text for guidance when facing difficult decisions. The sick and dying find comfort in its teachings on impermanence and liberation. For millions of Buddhists, the Dhammapada is not ancient scripture, but a living voice. The Buddha speaking directly across the centuries. When Buddhism travelled to East Asia, the Dhammapada came with it. Though it occupied a somewhat different place in the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean traditions, these cultures developed their own emphases within Buddhism, particularly the Mahayana schools, with their focus on the Bodhisattva ideal and the concept of Buddha nature. Yet the Dhammapada continued to be translated, studied, and appreciated for its clear, direct presentation of fundamental Buddhist principles. The text's journey to the West began in the 19th century. Colonial officials and Christian missionaries in Sri Lanka and Burma encountered Buddhism and were struck by certain similarities to Christian ethics, combined with profound differences in metaphysics and practice. The first English translations were often done by Christians attempting to understand Buddhism in order to refute it more effectively. Yet many of these translators found themselves moved by the teachings they encountered. Max Muller's translation, published in the late 1800s, was one of the first to reach a wide Western audience. Though his translation reflects certain Victorian assumptions and linguistic limitations, it introduced countless readers to Buddhist thought. Successive translations by scholars and practitioners have refined our understanding, each bringing new insights while acknowledging the difficulty of rendering ancient Pali into contemporary English. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the Dhammapada has found readers far beyond traditional Buddhist communities. People seeking alternatives to Western religious traditions have discovered in these verses a spiritual path that emphasizes direct experience over blind faith, ethical living over ritual observance, and liberation over salvation. The text speaks to perennial human concerns: how to handle difficult emotions, how to live ethically in a complex world, how to find peace amid constant change, how to understand the relationship between mind and experience. Modern psychology has found surprising convergences with Buddhist insights preserved in the Dhammapada. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, emphasizes the role of thoughts in creating emotional responses, a principle stated explicitly in the opening verses. Mindfulness-based approaches to stress reduction and mental health draw directly on Buddhist meditation practices. Neuroscience research on meditation has validated what the Dhammapada described 25 centuries ago: that mental training can produce measurable changes in brain structure and function. Yet the Dhammapada is not merely a historical anticipation of scientific findings. It remains a spiritual text in the fullest sense, offering guidance for those seeking liberation that goes beyond psychological adjustment or stress reduction. The ultimate goal of the Buddhist path, as the text makes clear, is nirvana, the complete transcendence of suffering through the elimination of craving and ignorance. This is not a therapeutic aim, but a soteriological one, concerned with final freedom rather than improved coping. For contemporary practitioners, the Dhammapada offers several distinct values. First, it provides clear, concise formulations of Buddhist principles that can be understood even by beginners. The verses do not require extensive background in philosophy or theology. They speak directly to human experience in language that, while ancient, remains remarkably accessible. Second, the text offers practical guidance for daily life. Its verses address concrete situations: how to handle anger, how to speak skillfully, how to maintain motivation for practice, how to cultivate helpful mental states. This practicality makes it useful not just for study, but for application. When facing a difficult emotion, you can consult the relevant chapter and find specific advice, not abstract theory. Third, the Dhammapada serves as an introduction to the larger world of Buddhist scripture. Its anthology format, drawing from various parts of the Pali Canon, offers a survey of major themes that can then be explored more deeply in longer texts. Many people begin their encounter with Buddhist literature through the Dhammapada and use it as a foundation for further study. Fourth, the text functions as a touchstone for checking understanding. Because it presents teachings with such clarity, it serves as a standard against which to measure whether more complex philosophical developments remain true to the Buddha's core insights. Throughout Buddhist history, reformers and revivalists have returned to texts like the Dhammapada to cut through accumulated interpretive elaborations and reconnect with the teaching's essential message. In personal practice, the Dhammapada can be used in multiple ways. Some practitioners read a verse or two each day as part of morning reflection, allowing that day's reading to inform their awareness throughout the day. Others use it for study, reading chapters systematically with commentary, exploring the meaning of each verse in depth. Still others memorize favorite verses, keeping them available for recall in challenging moments when a reminder of the path would be helpful. The text also serves beautifully as an object of contemplation during meditation. Rather than trying to empty the mind, a practitioner might focus on a single verse, examining its meaning from multiple angles, allowing insights to arise. A verse like, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased," can sustain months or even years of contemplation, revealing new depths with each return. In Buddhist communities, the Dhammapada continues to be chanted, studied in groups, and used as a basis for Dharma talks. Teachers draw on its verses to illustrate points, to provide authoritative support for their teachings, to connect contemporary concerns with ancient wisdom. The text bridges individual practice and communal life, private insight and public discourse. For those who do not identify as Buddhist, the Dhammapada still offers considerable value. Its ethical teachings on non-harm, honesty, and mental cultivation are not specifically Buddhist, but universally applicable. Its psychological insights into the workings of mind speak to anyone interested in understanding human consciousness more clearly. Its practical guidance for living with greater wisdom and compassion requires no religious commitment to apply. As we conclude this exploration, it is worth emphasizing what the Dhammapada fundamentally represents: a path. Not a philosophical system to be mastered intellectually, not a set of beliefs to be adopted uncritically, but a path to be walked. The verses serve as markers along that path, indicating direction when one loses the way, offering encouragement when difficulties arise, pointing out dangers to avoid and opportunities to embrace. The path begins with a simple recognition that suffering exists and that its causes can be understood and eliminated. This recognition leads to ethical discipline, to meditation practice, to the gradual cultivation of wisdom. The path winds through many territories. The territory of morality, where we learn to act without causing harm. The territory of concentration, where we gather the scattered energies of mind into focused power. The territory of wisdom, where we see directly into the nature of reality and self. Along this path, the Dhammapada serves as a companion, patient and reliable. When you encounter difficulty in your practice, you can return to these verses and find relevant guidance. When you experience insight, you can find it reflected and confirmed in the Buddha's words. When you need inspiration to continue, you can read about the qualities of the Arahant and understand what is possible through dedicated practice. The beauty of the Dhammapada lies in its combination of profound depth and accessible simplicity. A child can understand many of its verses at face value. A scholar can spend a lifetime exploring their implications. Between these extremes lies the experience of ordinary practitioners, people who work, raise families, navigate the challenges of contemporary life, and seek to do so with greater wisdom and compassion. For these people, the Dhammapada offers something precious, a tested path walked by countless beings over 25 centuries, a path that begins exactly where you are and leads, step by step, toward liberation. Whether you walk this path within a Buddhist community or adapt its insights to your own spiritual framework, whether you commit to years of intensive practice or simply apply its wisdom to daily challenges, the teachings remain available, clear, and transformative. In the quiet of your evening, as you prepare for sleep, consider carrying one teaching from the Dhammapada into your dreams. Perhaps it is the reminder that mind precedes all mental states, encouraging you to pay attention to your thoughts. Perhaps it is the eternal law that hatred ceases only through non-hatred, inviting you to put down old resentments. Perhaps it is the image of the wise person like a rock unmoved by storms, inspiring you to develop equanimity. Whatever verse speaks to you, let it settle into consciousness, not as mere words, but as a seed that might sprout into understanding. The Buddha, speaking these verses to his followers in ancient India, could not have imagined the world in which you now read or hear them. Yet the suffering he addressed then is the same suffering you know now. The mind he described operates by the same principles in your experience as in his followers. The liberation he pointed toward remains available, as accessible now as it was 25 centuries ago, because it depends not on external circumstances, but on internal transformation. So as this script draws to a close, as your own evening meditation or reflection comes to an end, remember that the Dhammapada is not something you finish. It is something you return to again and again, finding new meanings, new applications, new depths. It is a well that never runs dry, a light that never goes out, a voice that continues speaking as long as beings seek freedom from suffering. May the wisdom preserved in these verses serve you well on your own journey. May you find the courage to look honestly at your experience, the determination to walk the path of practice, and the patience to allow transformation to unfold at its own pace. May you know the peace that comes from ethical conduct, the clarity that comes from meditative concentration, and the freedom that comes from wisdom. And if you have found value in this exploration, if these teachings have spoken to something in your own heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this with others who might benefit. The Dharma, the truth the Buddha taught, is meant to be shared freely, passed from hand to hand like a torch, lighting the way through darkness. In that spirit, we offer these teachings not as possession but as gift, hoping they serve the liberation of all beings. Rest well tonight, knowing that the path toward freedom is always available, that each moment offers an opportunity for awareness, that transformation is possible. The Dhammapada awaits your return whenever you need its guidance, and the wisdom it contains, the direct and timeless insights of the awakened one, will continue offering their light as long as beings seek the way.